Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2. Today I want to show you guys what is by far and away the best leveling build for Sorcerer, which is just going to absolutely blast all the way to level 100. It's probably the second or actually first best leveling build in the whole game. It is just unbelievably powerful. It's very similar to what we've been using on Sorcerer for leveling, but it's actually gotten better with this update. So I'm going to go over everything that you guys need to know in order to just absolutely blast. The only other leveling build that is as strong as this is going to be Necromancer with minions and Blood Surge, which I will have a video on tomorrow. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check that out tomorrow. Sorcerer is looking to be incredibly powerful in Season 4, not only with this build being like the best leveling build, but also in the end game, Frozen Orb Sorcerer absolutely dominates and it is a ridiculous amount of fun. I will have a video on the Frozen Orb build very soon, pretty much as soon as I get it set up personally, but I already have a build planned out with a link in the description, so make sure to check that out if you're able to set it up very early on. Not much to say other than you are going to absolutely crush the entire game with this build and just absolutely blast through the leveling process. Before we get into things, I want to quickly show you guys the Mobalytics desktop app, which you can download absolutely for free. This has a ton of really cool features. What I really like about it is the build tier list. You can very easily look on here and see which builds are going to actually be pretty good. And you can even take a look at like Frozen Orb builds, Shadow Step, Rogue builds, which are really interesting. Like I didn't even know that that was a thing. You can click on here and just look at all sorts of different builds. They have a ridiculous amount. You can even go to a community section and you can even upload your own build, which could end up getting a lot of favorites and a lot of people could really like. But there's just a limitless amount of builds here. And when you download the desktop app, you can actually open up an overlay in game, which is particularly nice. And this is going to be really helpful if you are following my leveling guide, because for example, you could click on my leveling guide and you could actually open this up in game and you can look at the skill tree and see the path that I took to follow all of these individual skill points. So you could just boom, pop it open in game, click on the leveling build, and every time that you want to see where to spend your skill points or where to actually put or what legendaries you want to be looking out for or how you want to spec the Paragon board, etc., you can literally just click the button, and it's really nice because in game you can just have it side by side too. So it's actually a perfect addition. Big thanks to Mobalytics for sponsoring today's video. Highly recommend checking it out. Download link will be in the description. And I'm actually going to be referencing how I want to spend the skill points here because I planned it out pretty meticulously. Before we get into things, if you find the video helpful, I'd greatly appreciate a like and subscribe if you are interested in videos similar to this one. I'm going to be streaming a ton over on Twitch. The second that this is out, I'm going to be blasting on this build. So feel free to swing by if you have any questions or you just want to hang out. I would love to see more of you guys around. All right, let's just get into it. If you have not played Sorcerer before, for the last few seasons, actually probably since the game came out, the absolute best leveling build has been to utilize Firewall. The reason that Firewall is so strong is that by default, it just has a really high weapon damage scaling of 160%. It is damage over time, but you can just slap a few on the ground and walk away. You also get a lot of synergy with damage against burning enemies and a lot of different things that you can benefit from that. Fiery Surge is going to give you a crazy amount of mana regen, so mana basically becomes a non-factor. In Season 4, a lot of the pet stuff got significantly buffed. If you remember when playing the beta of Diablo 4, when we were capped at level 25, I think it was, Hydra was unbelievably busted for Sorcerer. You just put this on and it would just kill everything. Because pets now inherit 100% of our stats with the changes in Season 4, Hydra is a very easy addition to this build to just drastically increase your damage output without having to lose any damage for Firewall. And it happens to also do burning damage, so the synergies all line up very well. So all we're going to do is just spec into Firewall and Hydra, and our damage is going to be absolutely off the charts. When it comes to speccing your skill tree, there is some amount of variation, and obviously if you have a preference, feel free to lean towards that, but this is how I would recommend most people do it. When it comes to your basic skill, I really like Arc Lash because of this third point, giving you 18% movement speed in total. However, if you want more raw damage, Firebolt is the way to go, particularly against bosses because it increases the amount of burning damage you do to that enemy. So every 3 seconds, throw out a Firebolt, 25% increased burning damage is really going to help with the single target, which is pretty much the only downside of this build is your single target damage will feel a little bit weak. Because Firewall is a mastery skill and Hydra is all the way over here, we have to use a different skill in the meantime. Chain Lightning is probably your best bet early on and then speccing out of it, but for simplicity's sake, and because you want to end up using Fireball enchant later on, I'm just going to go into Fireball, but again, you could go into Chain Lightning and then spec out of it once you actually unlock Firewall and then put your points there. I'm just going to dump a few points into Fireball here. You could go into Enhanced Fireball and Destructive or Greater Fireball, but Just for simplicity's sake, we're just going to dump the points there. And then once we gain access to teleport, we want to spec into teleport. Real quickly, I'm just going to put a point into flickering just for the movement speed because I want that. And then we're going to finish maxing out fireball. Also just going to put 1 point into flame shield here for some much needed survivability. It's literally an immunity, so it's just nice to have on your bar. And 1 point is a relatively low investment. To get further into the tree, we're just going to put 1 point into glass cannon. And now we have access to Hydra, which is going to be a massive power spike. Going to put a point into that, and then the enhanced Hydra, and then we're going to go into summoned Hydra, which increases the amount of burning damage that it does. Damage over time cannot crit, so speccing into this is not very good because we care about the burning damage rather than the actual hits of damage, and we don't have very much crit, so this is not really going to help us early on. At this point, I'm just going to put 2 more points into glass cannon. If you're on hardcore or you don't want to take more damage, you could alternatively just put the points into Hydra and level that up. Now we have access to Firewall, so our build is actually going to come online. At this point, you could start to, as you invest points into Firewall, take points out of Chain Lightning. But you will want the 5 points into Fireball at some point because our enchant is going to be Fireball, which is drastically going to increase our AoE clear. Now that we have Firewall, we're going to go into Enhanced, and then we are going to go into Mages so that the enemies actually burn for a total of 11 seconds, which is going to be really good. And we're simply just going to max out Firewall. Then we're going to go 3 into Fiery Surge. 45% mana regen is fantastic with this. Mana very easily becomes a non-factor with this build. You get like 1 legendary, which I'll talk about, and Fiery Surge, and even then, like, you pretty much have no mana problems. In which order you want to spend the rest of your points is kind of up to preference, honestly. I like to go into Enhanced Teleport and then Shimmering for the damage reduction, or you could just instantly beeline the additional damage for Hydra, up to you. But getting the 30% DR after teleport is very nice. Quickly, I'm just going to put 1 point into Elemental Attunement. You just have a pretty good likelihood of just resetting the cooldown of Teleport and Flame Shield, which can pretty easily speed up your clear time just while leveling. Only happens once every 10 seconds, but if it happens to reset Teleport, that's pretty good. Now we've unlocked our Capstone, we're going to go into Combustion, which just increases our burning damage by 20%, and we get a little bit of extra because there will be 2 sources of burning on the enemy with Firewall and Hydra, or 3 sources if you happen to use Firebolt. I would recommend swapping out of Arc Lash into Firebolt when you do the Capstones, or if you're fighting the bosses in Helltide, so you get this extra single target damage. At this point, I'm going to go into Endless Pyre for a little bit of extra damage, but mainly going into 3 points for Warmth. This gives you a crazy amount of healing. You're applying a ton of burn to enemies. Alternatively, you don't have to use this. You could use Life on Hit on one of your pieces of gear, and that basically gives you invincibility in terms of just healing to full health constantly. But Warmth pretty much does the same thing, so you don't have to waste any slot on gear, and that is crazy for survivability. Going to do something a little bit controversial here, but I'm actually going to go into Ice Blades. Ice Blades is nice because it has a good chance of applying Vulnerable for us, but it also counts as an additional Conjuration. Next, we're going to go 3 points into Conjuration Mastery. In Season 4, Conjuration Mastery actually doesn't only give you % increased damage, it also gives you movement speed and mana regeneration. So having points into Conjuration Mastery and then having 2 Conjurations and also being able to summon multiple Hydras you're going to get a ton of value out of Conjuration Mastery. And going into like Ice Armor or Frost Nova for like very low uptime on vulnerability, it really isn't worth it. Like Ice Armor is just a tiny bit of survivability. You could even go into Lightning Spear instead of Ice Blades if you wanted to. This is where I would say like this one skill point is heavily preferential. Some people even go into Inferno, but I think benefiting from Conjuration Mastery and getting the every once in a while vulnerable application with Ice Blades is probably your best bet. I'm going to go 3 points into Inner Flames for straight up just 9% increased damage, and then we're going to get some survivability. You could go into this earlier on if you are feeling a little bit squishy. Mana Shield is really good for just some damage reduction, and Protection is probably the best thing that you can get on Sorc. And whenever you use a cooldown, being Ice Blades, Teleport, and Flame Shield, you're going to be getting a barrier, which is really nice. These last few points are, again, pretty preferential. You could go into Devastation and Elemental Dominance for a bit of extra damage with your Firewall, but this will not apply to Hydra. Personally, I'm going to go into Enhanced Flame Shield. This is not movement speed anymore, it is burn radius, and then I'm just going to go into the heal. But if you don't feel like you need the healing or the survivability, just take those points out. And like I said, you could go into Elemental Dominance or whatever you feel is good. Our last points, I'm going to go 2 into Soulfire so that our Pyromancy skills simply just cost less mana and deal % increased damage. When it comes to which legendaries you want to get and other stuff relating to gear, the Serpentine aspect is incredibly good. If you put it on a two-hander, you will get 2 additional Hydras active. Usually imprinting a legendary aspect on a two-hander isn't great while leveling because you're constantly going to be replacing that, but with the changes to the codex giving you permanent access to that legendary, it'll probably be a decent bet. But if you're constantly cycling out that weapon, then you just want to put it on like your gloves or something, because I don't believe you get 2 Hydras if it is on the amulet. But getting an extra Hydra is a ton of value there. Prodigy aspect you can go get in Witchwater and Hawazar just by doing that dungeon. Using a cooldown gives you mana. This alone will give you pretty much infinite mana paired with Fiery Surge and Conjuration Mastery. Conceited aspect is probably your best overall damage that you can get other than Serpentine, because you're constantly going to have a barrier anytime you use a cooldown, and it just drastically increases your damage. Edge Masters is also just extra damage, and you will have pretty much permanent mana once you set the build up properly, so that's also just free damage. Then we just want to grab some survivability oriented stuff, so Juggernaut to armor cap us, Aspect of Concentration anytime you use a Conjuration skill, which is our Hydra, and our Ice Blades, you just get a ton of DR, and Aspect of Might anytime you use a basic skill, you also get a ton of DR. At some point you could swap out of a basic skill entirely, and you could, I don't know, use any other skill that you want. I think having Firebolt later on just for the raw damage once you have movement speed cap with your gear is probably your best bet. But if you don't want to use a basic skill, you want to use something else, feel free. You'll just have to swap out of Aspect of Might. Flamewalker's aspect is great for survivability. Anytime you are just near your firewall, you get 25% movement speed. That is pretty insane. With Season 4, we are getting a lot of gear changes, and we are also getting access to tempering. The tempering manuals that you want to be looking out for is fire damage over time, because this will both affect Firewall and your Hydra. And then there's also tempering aspects for Hydra. You can get Hydra damage flat up, which would drastically buff your Hydra, or you can even get a temper aspect that increases your Firewall size, which is really, really nice. Outside of that, when it comes to what stats you actually want on your gear, the best thing to look out for is damage over time. Life per hit is very good for survivability. And attack speed is pretty nice so that you can cast your firewalls a little bit faster. Otherwise, intelligence is very good because it's just percentage multiplicative increased damage. If you can get mana on kill on like one single piece of gear, you will pretty much never have a mana problem ever again. Otherwise, I would highly recommend looking out for ranks to conjuration skills, ranks to mastery skills, as those are on different pieces nowadays, and also trying to cap out your resistances prior to going into World Tier 3 or 4. Getting some resistances will drastically increase your survivability and make a really big difference. Just keep in mind that crit chance is not going to do anything for you because damage over time skills cannot crit. When it comes to what gems you want on the weapon, you just want amethyst. On armor, you want rubies for max HP. And on jewelry, you want diamonds for all resistances. Like an early starter Paragon board that you guys can spec into here if you are interested, I would recommend though swapping out of Firewall once you gain access to the Frozen Orb Unique. But you could easily take this build all the way to level 100 and still crush. This is literally what I did last season, and it's actually going to be even better now with the tempering affixes, etc. All right, that's pretty much it. Feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions, or again, you can feel free to check me out over on Twitch. I will be streaming the second that the update comes out, and I'll be absolutely turbo blasting, and I plan to have a Frozen Orb build updated and posted very, very early on, so make sure to be on the lookout for that. If you enjoyed, please be sure to drop a like, subscribe for videos similar to this one. My cat's going crazy. And yeah, thanks. That's all. Have a good one, guys. Peace.